conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, Beshear is trying the message of hope thing, the same kind of thing Kamala Harris, of course, is doing nationally. Beshear's trying to do here in Kentucky, has done for the past few years, but he's really ramping it up. Perhaps it's because, well, he's trying to revive the Democrat Party here in Kentucky or try to make himself a political future here in Kentucky. After all, he did make a run kind of at some national stage level, trying to be that VP pick for Kamala Harris. That didn't work out. And based upon some insider information that we're seeing in the headlines, it doesn't appear that Beshear is on any kind of short list for a cabinet position. So that means that if he wants to have any kind of political future, if he wants to be politically relevant at all, maybe he has to try to eke out some sort of future here in Kentucky that might be running for a Senate position or as such. But in order to do so, well, he's got to win people over. And so he's certainly peddling that message, but we'll take a look at what the numbers say because maybe, well, it's not that quite straightforward. Speaking of the Beshear administration, once again, Beshear manages to prove that he has no idea how to run a prison system, as we see that prisoners in Kentucky hack is doing a lot of work in that sentence, but hacked the inmate system in order to give themselves over $1 million worth of free media that they're now trying to collect. The state's trying to collect. Just another one of Beshear's long line of problems and mistakes that he's made when it comes to our prison system. And then finally, Democrats in Kentucky mocked as Republicans considered a bill this past session that would allow local governments to decide if they want to go ahead and have fluoride in the water locally. Those of you who watched the show way back then, and by way back then I mean during earlier this session here, well, you would have heard me have on Nurse Batson, who's an activist on the fluoride front as far as allowing localities to choose to not fluoride the water. And well, the Democrats responded and the papers responded in a pretty interesting way. They should feel ashamed of themselves after new headlines. New studies from the CDC has come out proving that, well, maybe there is some real concern there. We'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But before I dig down into it, please make sure wherever you're listening to this at, if you can like, if you can comment, if you can share, if you can subscribe, please do so. If you're listening to this on the radio or watching this on TV, go ahead and head over to theandrewshow.com if you want to listen to the show that comes out every day of the week, Monday through Friday, or most days of the week, Monday through Friday. You are only hearing it once a week on those places, but perhaps you want to hear my lustrous voice and my takes a little more often than just once a week. Well, if you head over to theandrewshow.com, you can tune in there. Also, if you want to reach out to the show with your tips, your stories, anything you want to hear about or think I should know about, go ahead and email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Now, let's dig down into it. So early on, I mentioned in my opening that Beshear is really peddling this kind of message of hope thing that Kamala Harris is trying to peddle. This point that we have joy and the forward and momentum and everything is great. Strength through joy. No, wait, hold on. Strength through joy was a Nazi slogan. That's right. That was a Nazi slogan of strength through joy. No, they're peddling strength through joy, but they mean it not as Nazis, supposedly, this time, but they mean that we have a lot of hope in our future. But in order to have hope, you have to think tomorrow will be better. You have to think your future will be better. And Beshear and Kamala Harris are both trying to peddle this kind of our future can be super bright, despite the fact that they're currently in power and despite the fact that the data, as well as the initial real feeling of citizens, doesn't quite line up. And what do I mean here? Well, Beshear over the weekend posted this. He said, because of our work, we aren't looking at the same Kentucky anymore. Now we're looking at our new Kentucky home where opportunity and prosperity are possible for everyone. So he's saying a few things there. First, he's saying that he's reshaped Kentucky drastically, that Kentucky is far different than the Kentucky he took over from. And he's saying that because he thinks he's putting up a lot of economic wins on the board. On top of that, of course, that the state has brought in a fair amount more money into the coffers. And he also simultaneously saying that now we have opportunity and prosperity are possible for everyone. That's a direct quote, indicating that he didn't think that opportunity and prosperity was available for everyone before. And which is interesting point, because realistically, before Beshear took over, there wasn't a whole lot of economic opportunities in like places like Eastern Kentucky and Western Kentucky. And I don't think there particularly has picked up at large amounts. I mean, he's spent a lot of money on it, but economic opportunities to people that live in rural areas, you either have to spend billions upon billions of dollars trying to get in place infrastructure into those areas, or you have to encourage them to move, and neither which have been done. But what do the numbers say? Because remember, Beshear took over in December of 2019. And while he did have the COVID occurrence, we can look at his response to that and have some real conversation, something we'll do today. But he took over in December of 2019. And so when we look at the numbers, what do we see? Well, first, let's talk about how much he spent. So over Beshear's tenure, since December of 2019, the Economic Development Cabinet, so that's just the cabinet within Kentucky whose job it is to do economic development, has spent $709 million just in their budget. And that is cash going out. Remember, when we talk about economic development spendings, we're talking about actual money that was taken from your pocket and spent on these things. There's other things that they also do that wouldn't necessarily show up in a budget. Things like economic incentive and tax incentive programs. And that is where we offer up incentives to individuals. And it's not that we gave them money, but they didn't have to pay into the state money that, well, any other business like you or I would operate would go ahead and have to pay into. And these include things like training reimbursements. So if you train people to move to your next level, or you say that you're training people and teaching them new job skills, you can turn around and claim that against your taxes that you're owed to the state. Those types of tax credit programs. Not necessarily things that I would say attract in businesses. In fact, when we look at on Subsidy Tracker, a lot of the businesses claiming these have been in Kentucky well before these programs were put in place by Beshear. They just so happen to be taking advantage of them, because why wouldn't they? So he spent $709 million just on the Economic Development Cabinet. On top of that, we have the tax credits that's handed out, so the money that we never got into the state and was handed out to individuals based upon who the government chooses. Because that's the other thing. Some people would point that and say, well, it's just money the state didn't make, Andrew. Why do you have an issue with it? And I don't particularly have an issue with the state bringing in less money, as long as everyone who's in business has the opportunity to not pay that kind of money. In fact, I would say that giant corporations can more so afford to pay for their own training and pay for their own economic opportunities without tax incentives than small mom and pop businesses that have far less employees could afford to do so. So $709 million plus those tax incentives. Now let's look in the workforce investment category. That has spent over Beshear's tenure since 2019, December of 2019, $5.2 billion in workforce investment. Now, if we're to be honest, $4.5 billion of that was COVID unemployment subsidies. So even if you take that out for quote unquote honesty's sake, though when we come back, we'll ask a question whether or not that's his fault, we still have $700 million in there. So just in workforce development and economic development, we have over $1.4 billion. But once again, we have to take out that $4.5 billion that comes from COVID. And how much can we blame Beshear from COVID, especially looking back? Because a lot of people claim, look, he's doing the best he could. Everybody had to deal with it. You can't blame Beshear. In fact, when I talked about these economic numbers online and made a post about it, I was seeing comments along those same lines as well. But let's be honest here. Did Beshear respond the way everybody else did? Could he have done something different? We'll discuss that and talk about what his deliverables have been and what those numbers look like now. How much has he improved? After this short break, you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Are you a product, service, or business trying to reach conservative Kentuckians? Well, the Andrew Cooperrider Show can be exactly what you're looking for. Unlike anything else out there, the Andrew Cooperrider Show reaches conservative Kentuckians statewide through radio, TV, podcasting, social media, as well as email. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show to see if we have a marketing package that fits your budget. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the contact tab. We can also email the Andrew Cooperrider Show at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Let's be the marketing solution that your business has been looking for. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were talking about Beshear's taking over office. He says that he's remade Kentucky, that now suddenly, unlike before, there's tons of economic opportunity and prosperity that are possible for everyone. Somehow, once again, that was his direct quote. Now we're looking at our new Kentucky home where opportunity and prosperity are possible for everyone, indicating that somehow before he took office, that these just things weren't available to him. That must mean that, or available to you all, sorry. That must mean that there's been a drastic shift in our system, surely. And so we've talked about what he's spent, just outside of COVID, over $1.4 billion into economic development and workforce development over his tenure. But we have to take out $4.5 billion that was spent during COVID. Now, some people would argue that you can't count that in because you can't count in COVID. And for those people's sake, because my argument doesn't need those $4.5 billion to point out the kind of place that Beshear has made us into, I'll talk about in a second. But should we remove it? I don't think we should. In fact, look at this headline from the Herald Leader. It states pretty clearly that Kentucky had the highest unemployment by percentage rate in the entire country. Beshear laid off through his mandates more people than any other state in the country by percentage. By percentage, we had the highest unemployment rate. So you can't say Beshear was just making the same decisions as everyone else. It's quite clear that we could argue that, especially during the initial lockdown, Beshear was making even stronger, larger, more overreaching lockdowns and shutting down in more categories than any other state. For an example, take the field of chiropractic. I believe that's how I would call that. Yeah, chiropractors. We're the only state in the country that shut down chiropractors. I don't know if it's because Beshear just had a bad experience once with a chiropractor and hated them and wanted to go ahead and, target them for some reason, but he literally shut down chiropractors. Only state in the country who did that. And regardless of how you feel about chiropractic, none of them should have been shut down, though it's clear we can see exactly how Beshear feels about it. So he's unemployed more people than any other place, made more vastly far-reaching lockdown mandates than any other country initially, and he did something that not every single state made the decision of, which was to go ahead and shut down a second time in November. Not every state made that decision. Some states did, some states didn't. Beshear was one of the states who did. Now, there are other states in the nation that made different decisions than Beshear and didn't have the state's highest by percentage unemployment rate. Do they get credit for not doing that? When we look at their data, we don't see vastly different outcomes from COVID. In fact, in some places, we see better outcomes from COVID. So it kind of flies in the face of this entire claim that somehow Beshear isn't to blame for his COVID lockdowns. Not to mention the future effects that that would have on our education system. But I don't need to rehash it. All of you know, if you're listening to the show, unless you hate listen to it, chances are you agree with me. Beshear went too far for COVID, and we should probably blame him for that spending as we look at it. But let's take that out of it. Let's pretend COVID never happened. Let's just look at where he started at and where he's at now. Okay, so since December, so he's got his $1.4 billion in spendings, plus well over, I would say probably more than that. I mean, it's hard to find, right? Because just take the Kentucky Economic Tax Incentive. That's like $65 million a year for the Kentucky Entertainment Incentive. That's for just people filming TVs and movies and things. $65 million. That's not to mention the millions upon millions upon millions we hand out, of course, in things like the workforce reimbursement tax incentives and those kinds of tax breaks we give. Not to mention, too, the state in this past budget, for an example, gave millions of dollars to private entities in order to build up developments in places like Louisville, where then they turn around and give out the handout too as well. So you got to add that in. So we're easily over probably over $3 billion that has been spent since Beshear's been in office, or at least been handed out in order to jog this economic opportunities for everyone, where suddenly we now, and if he had spent $3 billion and somehow he was able to make it to where we really all do have more opportunities and more prosperity than we did before, well then, I guess you would applaud him for it. But of course, that didn't happen. In fact, it's very difficult to claim any government did that at all, ever. And in fact, Republicans should recognize this. It was in our platform before it was changed this last convention, that we recognize that business isn't created by the government. The government doesn't create jobs. Government doesn't create economic opportunities. It's private businesses that do. And all government does is get in the way to hinder them with their regulations. But of course, those regulations get put in place and are advocated for by big business in order to lock out small competitors. And this will become clear as we dig into the numbers. So what has Beshear given us for those billions of dollars? Well, since December 2019, unemployment in December 2019 was 4%. It is now 4.7%. That's an almost 25% increase. It's about a 20% increase in unemployment since Beshear took office. 20% increase. Now, if there's all this new opportunity and prosperity available for everyone, why is unemployment 20% higher than when you took office? Now, in December 2019, workforce participation was 58.8%. What does that mean? Well, that means everybody who's of working age, so you're not too old to work and you're not too young to work, look at that as the workforce. And the participation rate is the amount of people who are either working a job or actively looking for a job. They're not just sitting at home, pulling in welfare, not looking, or living with family, or deciding to do whatever it is they do, or living however they end up eking by without actively being a part of the workforce. Now, Kentucky has always struggled with this, but under Beshear in December of 2019, when he took over, workforce participation rate was 58.8%. That's pretty high. That's less than 60%. But now it's 57.6%. That's an entire 1.2% drop in workforce participation rate. That's pretty big. That's a pretty big difference when you look at the fact that Kentucky is actively struggling with this and has been, quote unquote, recognized as this is a problem and Beshear's trying to solve it. Now, Beshear's claim has always been that we need to just create higher paying jobs available for the people in order to deal with this workforce participation rate. But if we have more people unemployed and less people actually looking for work, does this sound like a different Kentucky and a land of opportunities? Perhaps, less people have jobs and less people are working, but hey, wages have gone up, right? Maybe that's the claim. Maybe that's where the prosperity is coming from. Well, this is from KCO, the Kentucky Association of Counties. And in 2019, here in Kentucky, the average weekly wage was $918. Now, if we adjust that for inflation, if our wages just kept up with inflation, that would mean we should be currently at a $1,147 a week wage. But KCO says that we're actually at $1,119. So if we have less people working by percentage, we have less people looking for work by percentage, and we have people making less when adjusted for inflation. So how's this a success? How is Beshear claiming that this is the difference? Well, I'll tell you, there's two parameters that he's probably looking at. One, GDP outgrew inflation. So Kentucky technically grew its economy. Well, meanwhile, the state's income has surpassed what it was before he took over, adjusted for inflation. So the state has more money and the big businesses have more money, because that is the real Beshear economic promise. And that was the one promised to you by and enabled by this Republican majority as well. An economic future where less small business owners exist. That's what happened with COVID, with these economic handouts like they do, with these incentives that they have out. It's all meant to go ahead and shift the jobs into larger corporations. Larger corporations get more of the workers, larger corporations bring in a greater share because the larger corporations are by and large the donors to these political classes in the first place. And because your average small business owner is just trying to scrape by, isn't really a strong political donating base, they go ahead and just ignore the needs of those people. What happens is Beshear comes in like they're doing in places like Hardin County. They hand out hundreds of millions of dollars in tax incentives to bring in big companies that can take advantage of those, because you have to have hundreds of millions of dollars to promise to build things in order to take advantage of those taxes. I mean, it ends up being a wash, but you got to front the money. Your average small business can't front it. So what happens is they come into an area and they bring these new high-paying jobs. But these new high-paying jobs go ahead and cause local inflation. And the small businesses now in the area, the restaurants, the small stores, everything else, they can't keep up because they can't move at that scale. Instead, it attracts in the people. You start getting large department stores open up, chain restaurants come in, franchises. And it pushes those small independent business owners out of business. They can't afford the labor. They don't have the kind of margins and the ability of scale that large corporations do. And what do they end up doing? They end up, them and their workers, instead of working for a small independent business, they end up working for giant corporations. That's exactly how the left wants it to as well. Because remember, you can't cancel a small independent business owner, right? But you can get them fired from their corporate job if they aren't DEI enough. You know, you can't cancel that waitress working for a small independent, restaurant. But you can cancel that waitress working for a giant corporation. It's all about control. It's also about lining the pockets of people who give them the money. That is the Beshear, new Kentucky, Beshear freedom and prosperity that he's promised. It's not opportunity for everyone. It's opportunity and prosperity for those who are already giving enough to him. Those who are already donating to him. Those who are already funding the political system. They've just decided to make more money off the Kentuckians' back while they actually, when adjusted for inflation, have made less, with less people working, less people looking for work. If it isn't new Kentucky, it's not a better one. Though I think this is probably business as usual. Just normal corruption. Let's not try to dress it up, Beshear, and pretend it's something different. Coming up after this, we'll talk about Beshear's failure in the prisons. Again, we'll have that after this short break. Listen up, my fellow business owners, because I got to tell you about a business that's incredibly important to any company's operations, and that's Amston, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. It's out of Richmond, Kentucky, and they provide cybersecurity for commercial businesses, and they've got dozens of years of experience working with government and private entities alike. So reach out to Amston today. That's A-M-P-S-T-U-N.com, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. Reach out to them today. Tell them Andrew sent you over. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So before the break, we had talked about Beshear's failures when it comes to the economy, the story he tries to put out there. Well, Beshear's inability to run a prison system and his administration's inability to run a prison system and to, honestly, do technology too, because this story ties in both, has reared its ugly head again in the most ridiculous way possible. And when you constantly see these types of things out of an administration, that tells you there's a real problem at the top. Sure, Beshear isn't directly in charge of his prisons in the same sense that, you know, your regional manager isn't directly in charge of the cashier at your local, chain gas station or something. But it does speak to a failure of leadership when those who are entrusted to do so continually fail. And just to recap all the failures we've seen in the prison systems, we have Beshear, we had the youth problem going on where he was putting men and women in the same, girls and boys, in the same juvenile detention centers, and they were understaffed horribly, and so a riot breaks out. And a girl ends up getting raped. A girl inmate ends up getting raped from a boy inmate while the prison guards were locked inside a room, unable to go out because of the riots going on. And they had to quell that. They bring in extra guards to go ahead and quell that. That failure there. We also had the failure in once again, the female juvenile justice system where We had incredible mistreatment, girls being forced to be naked for days on end in containment facilities, allegedly. We have women being harshly treated and punched in the face repeatedly. We have all kinds of sexual misconduct situations going on in the girls' prisons as well. On top of that, we've seen prisons that are come under investigation for their use of force. They themselves admitting that a significant percentage of the time they're misusing mace and other use of force problems. So you have that. Of course, you've had the problems in Cabinet for Health and Family Services as well. It kind of speaks to the same thing where they have kids sleeping on the floors of offices, something that they weren't able to fix for quite some time. But then you've also had a lot of issues when it comes to the technology side of things. Of course, the CAVIS system has been absolutely horrible. That's a system that we rolled out at the beginning of this year to go ahead and handle registration. It's system so bad that literally for about a week, the Louisville County Clerk's offices had to shut down just to kind of make up the difference. Those of you who listen to the show a fair amount or have for quite some time know that I've talked about this system a few times, and I went over some of their troubleshooting issues, some of which have no resolution to them at all. Additionally, as we talk about their administrative systems, we have the rollout of course, the Real ID system, where the state took over issuing driver's licenses as well as driver testing. That has led to people needing to wait 3 weeks and wake up every day to see if to try to get an appointment for 3 weeks out at their local licensing offices in order to get a driver's license. They can renew through mail or walk-in, but in order to get a driver's license, a permit, motorcycle license, commercial license, something like that, you have to schedule it at least 3 weeks in advance or drive hours away to a branch far away in order to hit that. That has been a real problem with the system. That doesn't make sense. And then also we've had the unemployment system. Remember, the legislature put aside tens of millions of dollars, I believe around $50-60 million to allow Beshear to go ahead and fix the unemployment system. The system that was blamed for why our unemployment was so broken during COVID and continues to be. In fact, we've had tons of issues with unemployment unaccounted for. We've had tons of issues with unemployment claims, not knowing exactly how much are there. And of course, then the state trying to come back in and recollect those. All those issues have gone on with computers and prisons. Well, they've come together, those issues within the Beshear administration, into one story. This is from the Herald Leader. And that's where I'm pulling this information from. And they published a story about how prisoners hacked. The word hack is doing a lot of work there. I'll explain. But they hacked the commissary to the electronic system on their tablets in order to go ahead and give themselves free movies and TV shows and everything else. So let me just kind of sum this up and explain it to you. So apparently, for those of you who are unaware, in our prisons, they have something called the commissary accounts. And that's where you can purchase things that aren't your basic necessities, maybe some different foods than what you would get inside the prisons, or some other items kind of like that you're allowed to have that you can go ahead and purchase. People can put onto those accounts. What they also have done is handed out tablets to the prisoners, giving them a tablet to use. And on the tablet, there is a system from Securus Technologies, which delivers content to those tablets. So you buy movies, TV shows, books, and so you can buy those things from this company onto that tablet. And then the Kentucky prison system goes ahead and gets a kickback from that. In fact, they've made well over $10 million off allowing that system into their prisons. Now, before I go into the story, maybe sitting there and saying, look, I thought jail was supposed to be pretty awful. But now you're telling me, as long as you have enough money, you can have a large choice of foods and movies and TV shows and reading and everything else through a tablet, and you can just purchase it. That doesn't sound that awful at all. Sounds like a pretty cushy life. And I hear you. It's almost like our justice system forgot that the entire point of them being there is to punish them, not just to make them as easy to control as possible, but to literally punish them for doing wrong in society. That's the entire point. But regardless, and so they put this onto their tablets. Well, the Kentucky prison system decided to go ahead and put another app onto the system that could connect the commissary accounts to the reading accounts. So they're just both on the same tablet. And there's a way to transfer money from the commissary into your tablet account so you could buy things. So within 24 hours, the prisoners hacked this. How'd they hack it? Well, they figured out if you didn't have money in your commissary account and you simply put negatives, so you put like negative $500 into the transfer portal, but you didn't have money so it'd work, but if you hit negative 500 instead of 500, it would transfer $500 over onto the buy whatever electronic materials you want, movies, TV shows, app, without affecting your commissary account at all. It literally took the prisoners less than 24 hours to figure this out. And somehow, either it just spread like wildfire through all the prison systems, or more likely, nobody realized it until it had been going on for quite some time. And over that time, by simply typing negative and then an amount of money, the Kentucky prison system got hacked, and over $1 million that didn't exist in commissary accounts was transferred over into these electronic material purchasing accounts. Over $1 million worth. Now, it would be crazy that happened, right? It'd be even crazier if it had happened before, and somehow the administrator here and the state allowed it to still happen, right? That'd be crazy. Well, apparently this same company had the same exact problem in 2018 at a different prison system, I believe in Missouri. So not only was they not hacked, but by simply typing negative 500 is transferred over. But not only did that happen to the tune of $1 million, nobody caught it, but it happened before to the same company. And our state's like, oh, no, this sounds like a great idea. Let's go ahead and do it. Like, you think the company that was contracted would let them know, like, hey, look, listen, we're not trying to tell you what to do, but last time this happened, millions of dollars got transferred over that didn't exist. But of course, not really. In fact, the news here, the Herald Leader, actually interviewed a prisoner, and this is what he said. His name was Brown. He said that he discovered that if he put a minus sign in front of a dollar figure as he transferred money from his commissary account, he would actually add that much money to both his commissary account and his Securus account. By typing in $500, suddenly credited $500 to both of Brown's accounts. So it's not just $500 to the electronics account, but it was $500 also into the commissary accounts that was then used to buy items. And neither which, that's $1,000 just one time, negative 500. It didn't exist. They're stealing electronic things that the state has to pay for, but they're also stealing now physical things the state has to pay for. So how did they respond? How are they handling this situation? Well, we'll have that after this short break.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
And you're back in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were talking about this story out of the Kentucky prison systems where prisoners had stolen over $1 million by simply typing negative amounts into their commissary accounts and their electronic digital devices accounts, like, you know, to get reading books and movies. In these tablets that were handed out by the prison, they hacked them. Like I said, the word hack is doing a lot there. They just typed negative 500 instead of 500, and it would put money in both accounts. And so it's cost the state over $1 million because they have to pay out to the private company, but then also they, of course, had to pay out for the commissary things. And the money didn't really exist. And so how did they respond? Well, first, this problem actually happened 6 months or so ago. It happened a while ago. And the Beshear administration didn't tell anyone that this had occurred. Instead, what they went ahead and did is they put a lien on the commissary accounts of the prisoners. Now, you would think that perhaps they should be charged with stealing here, okay? Because they figured out if you typed in -500, you would get money credited to your account that didn't exist. You would think that would mean you stole $1,000. You knew you weren't supposed to be doing it. You knew the money wasn't real. You knew that wasn't the right thing to do, and yet you did it. And we know they knew that because, well, they didn't tell anybody right away. They weren't proud of what they did. You know, my mom, growing up, whenever I tried to argue that something wasn't wrong, her argument back, her retort back, which was so accurate, was, you know what you did was wrong because you never said anything to me about it in the first place. And it's exactly the kind of thing that if you thought it wasn't wrong, you would have said something. So they knew they were stealing. But of course, they're not getting charged for the stealing. And they should be asked questions why they aren't getting charged. The prisoners who took this money aren't being charged for stealing. Did they talk to a prosecutor? Did they talk to the legislators? Legislators said don't charge them. Did they talk to the attorney general about it? Apparently not. They just decided to go ahead and not pursue criminal charges. I mean, the article speaks nothing of their criminal charges. We don't have to guess why. We know that if they made moves to charge the likely hundreds of prisoners who stole over $1 million through tablets given to them by the state, it would create headlines, and we'd all know how incredibly incompetent these people are. So instead, they went ahead and put liens against commissary accounts. Where now, even months and months and months later, there is still liens, and they're still trying to collect from some of these prisoners. And I guess what, if you leave prison, well, you still have a lien on the account. What happens? What happens? They're not very clear on that at all. But of course, what do we expect here? It's funny the media is just now hearing about it as well. I implore you, and I know a lot of legislators listen to this, if you're on the oversight committee that oversees our prison system, there's a specific subcommittee too as well on the prison system, please call these people in and ask them why the individuals who stole this money are not being charged with crimes. I would love to know. Well, we've got one more story for you here. Those of you who listen to the show the length of time know that back during session, I had on Nurse Batson, Cindy Batson, and she's a activist on the side of the dangers of putting fluoride into water. And she, reading through the data and recognizing things, had realized that putting fluoride in the water, not only does it not do much for dental health, but it actually is effectively lowering IQ points. Well, we've got a new report from the CDC on this, but I want to reflect on what happened at the time. So Cindy was pushing out this bill. It got heard in committee. Cindy got to testify. Instead of quoting her or pushing her out there, a lot of media made fun of the bill. In fact, they made fun of the legislators for even considering and passing this piece of legislation out of a committee to begin with. In fact, Courier Journal ran this article at the time. Here you go. Some Kentucky lawmakers want fluoride removed from tap water. Kids' teeth be... I'm not sure I could say this word. I mean, it's printed in the newspaper, but I'm not sure I can say it on radio and TV. But it's the D word, meaning to go to hell. So there you go. So kids' teeth be like the same word as like a beaver makes with sticks. So clearly a vulgar headline meant to draw your attention and make the legislators look absolutely stupid. And that was published by the Courier Journal. I want you to remember that, okay? Because the CDC puts out a study, and what they discovered was that drinking too much fluoride in the water actually does affect your IQ. This is from USA Today, just a few days ago. It's important to note that as well. So what they wrote in an article, drinking water with more than 1.5 milligrams of fluoride per liter was consistently associated with lower IQ in children, the CDC report says. It did not say how much IQ might be lowered in children who drink water with fluoride levels that exceed that amount. The report also did not say whether adults could be affected by high levels of fluoride. Now, we know, for those of you who listen to the show and who've looked at the other data on these things that have been out well before the CDC was ready to admit to it, we're looking at a between 5 to 10 point IQ drop. That's quite a significant amount. But that was USA Today who wrote that. Interesting. You know why that's interesting? Because remember that Courier-Journal headline, some Kentucky lawmakers want fluoride removed from tap water, kids' teeth be a structure made by beavers? They're owned by USA Today. The Courier-Journal is owned by the same conglomerate that owns USA Today. In fact, USA Today is their like flagship kind of national online, or one of their flagship national online newspapers. In fact, if you go to USA Today's website and you go to the Courier-Journal's website, you're going to notice something. They're pretty much identical as far as their layout goes, their colors, the way they function. Because it's just a copy of the same website. The same website designer, same website people. So you literally have the same paper who publishes articles making fun of those who are saying that fluoride causes lower IQs, now publishing an article admitting that, yeah, okay, maybe that does happen. Do you think anybody is going to get an apology from the Courier-Journal? No, of course not. And this points to the bias in media. This is truthfully being approached with a clear and present bias. That, well, you know, there's no way that could be different because I hadn't heard about it yet. And so they will go ahead and pitch these things and talk about it. In fact, if you read the Courier-Journal's, that one's by Joseph Gerth, that very vulgar headline, but the factual headline from the Courier-Journal, if you read through it, they don't quote anybody within it for any length of time who testified as to why the fluoride should be optional. Keep in mind, they weren't even passing a bill to remove it. What they're simply allowing was locales like the county magistrates, judge executives could come together and vote on whether or not they wanted fluoride in their drinking water. Because right now it's mandated by the state that they add it in. And so this was just to give them an option of local control. It wasn't even to make them remove it. But despite that, it was incredibly dumb and stupid. That's what they said. And so when you reference the factual non-opinion articles at the time, they talk a lot about the Dental Association and all these other things, but they didn't bother to quote any of the people who were experts that talked about, you know, what the issues are here, where the fluoride comes from. People who are experts on the fluoride's effect on children. And to say it has no effect on adults, well, it doesn't really matter. We should have that conversation. In fact, at the time when we talked about this, we covered a study that was done in a podcast that was put out by the Department of the CDC, or no, DIH, I think, Department of Health there at the national level. A discussion they were having about drinking fluoride water amongst pregnant mothers and finding issues there as well. So clearly there's questions here that should be asked, but that's not apparently allowed to be asked unless the CDC says so, at least according to your local media. You think they'd bother to print a retraction to apologize, but that'd be asking too much from a media that has sold their soul in order to go ahead and push the narratives that they think, well, to them make the most sense. That's why this idea of, oh, that's not factual. We need to control information. Well, the question becomes who's controlling it? Who says whether it's factual or not? Begs the question. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank y'all so much for joining us. Back here tomorrow, but only in the podcast format. So please, if you're listening to this on the radio or TV or watching this on social media in the video format, please make sure you head on over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab to see where you can hear tomorrow's episode. Till then, we'll be seeing ya.